get settled and, get into their pajamas or however you are watching this Zoom, and we can get into it. Hey. Mhm. Okay.
I guess we should have hold music or something.
Yeah.
Elevator music.
The green room is always super the awkward waiting time is always the funnest part because you're there like, do I want to keep talking so it feels natural, or do I just stare awkwardly until like, okay, I have the minute, I don't have to fill the space anymore. Hello, everyone. I am Isa, and I'm a bookseller at Politics and Prose Bookstore, and I'd like to welcome all of you to P&P Live. Thank you for joining us in this virtual format. And while we have restarted in-person events, we will continue to virtually bring our Politics and Prose community the authors that you love and their new books. So at any point during the event, you can click on the link in the chat to purchase Everything I Need, I Get From You by Caitlyn Tiffany on the Politics and Prose website. Additionally, you can ask the author a question by clicking on Q&A, which can be found near the bottom of your screen. And while we'll try to get to everyone's questions, we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. Finally, we want to thank you for being here with us tonight. We are so thankful to our family of loyal customers, keeping our business and their spirits afloat. So it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Caitlyn Tiffany is a staff writer at The Atlantic, where she covers technology and internet culture. She was previously on the same beat at Vox's consumer culture vertical, The Goods, after starting her career writing about pop culture, fandom, and online community at The Verge. Currently, she lives in Brooklyn. Tiffany will be in conversation with Kyle Chayka, a contributing writer at The New Yorker, where he writes a column on digital culture and is the author of The Longing for Less, Living with Minimalism. He is currently at work on his second book, Filter World, which explores the impact of algorithmic technology on culture. So everyone, please welcome Caitlyn and Kyle to P&P Live.
Hi. I'm excited to be here. Apologize for how dark it is in my apartment. Such is life in a pre-war building. Oh no.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks everyone for coming. We are obviously here to launch Caitlyn Tiffany's excellent book, Everything I Need, I Get From You. How fangirls created the internet as we know it. And we should all look at the cover because it's a great cover and we can discuss it later. But I also write about the internet a lot, but One Direction was something that I knew nothing about before reading this book. And I feel like I got a crash course, not only in like a certain corner of pop music, but like how culture works on the internet right now and how obsession works on the internet right now, I think. So I had a really great time reading it. I think the best part about it is Caitlyn's voice and just the kind of charm and fun and absurdity that she brings into the whole book, whether it's talking about her own experience or other fans or Bruce Springsteen or like going on One Direction inspired adventures. I think it's just a very fun ride of a book. But that's what we're here to talk about, I guess. So I was wondering.
Thanks for that description, first of all. That was so nice.
Gotta pitch the book, I think.
Yeah. Love it.
So what I was curious to ask first was like, you are a One Direction fan yourself, like you were immersed in this scene as a participant in some ways. I was curious when you realized that like this was a book subject. Like when did it cohere for you from just something you were interested in into something that is like, okay, this is worth doing a whole book on and I'm gonna throw myself into it?
Yeah. Well, my first job in journalism was at The Verge, which I know you've written like really great features for too, so you're familiar with their vibe, but it's a tech website. So I kind of like, rolled up into New York City for the first time and was like settling in and being like, well, I don't know anything about iPhone specs or like ISPs or something. So like what can I contribute here? And they were expanding their culture coverage at the time. So that it sort of became obvious, like, oh, I'll just do Tumblr. Like I can just be the Tumblr girl. And because I was really involved in One Direction fandom, it just sort of like came naturally to start like writing. They had a section at the time called TLDR, which was for like really short form, like bloggy stuff about the internet, which was probably like the most fun I've ever had writing in my life. There was like basically no rules. There were times, maybe I would get in trouble for saying this, but there were times when I would literally just like show something to a copy editor and then publish it. Like it was like total freedom. There was like almost no oversight, but I was writing about One Direction fandom at that time and some of the interesting stuff that I was seeing on Tumblr, a lot of which like actually ended up being in the book. And then like as my time there went on and they were asking me to start thinking about like what would your official beat be, my editor there, Chris Plant, was like, I think you care about fandom, ? So then that became what I was kind of officially following. And then I think like it cohered into a book much later after I was no longer at The Verge, because I was still like on the internet culture beat, but I was sort of like it was like a specific moment in internet culture history where I guess like we had just gotten done sort of like explaining how Gamergate happened, or how like the alt-right happened, or how like the incel movement happened, like all these kind of subcultural movements on the internet that were associated with like boys and like fear about how the internet was like breaking their brains and like being used as this kind of like reactionary tool. Whereas like, I don't think there was the same kind of curiosity about what women were using the internet for at the time. And it felt like a good moment to kind of like, I don't know, correct that in some small way and point out like a lot of the things you kind of take for granted about like the way people talk on the internet, or like the visual language of the internet actually came from this like huge kind of like undercurrent that's not been discussed as much. And then it just made sense for it to be about One Direction because like that's where I was living.
Like that was the subculture that you were deepest into on the internet.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, I mean, I feel like now we understand or have a sense of what fandom is online and how the internet kind of thrives on this obsession mentality. But like if you had to just to define or describe fandom as a word, what would you say?
Oh, wow. I feel like I'm always complaining that it's a really boring word and it's like kind of an ugly word, and it stinks that there's not like a better one to swap in, especially when you're like control effing in your text and it's like, oh, I use this word 150 times. I guess like fandom is sort of like the like application of a lot of attention on the object of a fandom. So that's like, you know, in some versions like worshipful attention, and other versions just like a sort of like intense curiosity, or like even like kind of like affection that can be sometimes like tinged with disdain, or like with an urge to like change or correct whatever it is that you're a fan of. But yeah, I think it's just like a feeling of wanting to give an intense amount of attention to something.
It always felt to me like it was almost like people taking possession of something, like as you kind of describe in the book, people like turn One Direction members into characters in their lives almost, and like create new narratives for them, and like I don't want to like not quite play with them like dolls, but they become fictional characters almost.
Yeah, I mean, there were literal One Direction dolls. I actually had a Niall Horan doll until like more recently for me. But yeah, I think especially because of like the timing of One Direction, which is another reason that I thought they would be a good lens through which to tell the story of internet fandom. Like they kind of came up right when young people were joining Twitter, or like when Tumblr was getting really big. And they had also like, they were contestants on a reality TV show that they lost. So the fans like were really able to buy into this sort of exciting story of like, these boys would not be famous without us. Like we selected them and we like got everybody to pay attention to them. And therefore we kind of have this like creator's hand in their career. And, you know, I think it's probably common in all kinds of fandom to think like we understand them better than anyone else, including like their managers, or even in some cases, like including their partners or whatever. Like there was just this like really intense feeling of like, this is a shared project. And so like, yeah, like part of that is fan fiction, part of it's like using them as archetypes to play around with, but then some of it was also kind of like literal, like we are One Direction.
Yeah, that's a creepy way to put it that I had not thought of.
Yeah.
And I mean, what drives fandom is like our social networks. It seems like there wouldn't be as much connectivity or like collaborative power if not for like a Tumblr, or I don't know what other forms it would take. But it seems like it's like native to the internet and thrives on like those specific platforms that were emerging like in the 2010s as well.
Yeah, I think like all throughout internet history, like anytime there was like a new platform or a new method of communicating, you would see like fans be among the first people to find a use for it, because like it is so difficult offline, like in the course of your daily life, like unless your sibling or your best friend happens to like the same thing as you, like it's really hard to find that feeling of community, I guess. So they would, I mean, that's not like that revelatory about the internet. Like anybody who has a hard time doing what they're doing offline would be early adopters of internet technology. So that's like also applies to like the porn industry or like right-wing extremists or something, but like it applies to fans in kind of the same way. Like they're a little bit subversive, just in less dramatic fashion.
Yeah. And maybe could you describe like your own One Direction fandom, or like when did you start listening to this band and thinking about them?
Yeah, I was in college, which was a absolutely terrible environment for me. I was really not well suited to it at all. It's sort of weird because I wasn't like an internet kid growing up. Like I feel like I had a pretty, you know, like all American apple pie type of adolescence where I was like working at the mall food court and like playing soccer and just like only cared about school and like people that I had known since I was 4 years old. And then I got to college and I was just like, I don't relate to anybody here. Like, I don't understand what they're talking about. Like, I don't know how to be cool here, or like find people that I'm actually interested in talking to. I would just kind of end up like coasting along in like whichever group wasn't like actively like spitting me out, basically. And then my younger sisters were getting into One Direction at the time. So it just like happened that I was home and like they wanted to go see the One Direction documentary at the theater, and I was like, sick. I love to just like sit in the dark and like eat free popcorn that my mom paid for and like kind of not have to think about anything. And then it was really fun. Like at first I couldn't really tell them apart and like didn't really care what they were saying. And then like as it went on, I was like, oh, this music is kind of fun. Their friendship is really charming. I think that drew a lot of people to them. Like they had this like really like authentic seeming rapport with each other. And then I describe in the book, there was sort of this like pivotal moment in the documentary where they're doing like, they're going camping, which is like kind of this whole like staged bit, obviously, like, haha, these boys, they don't know how to, they're just clumsy and silly. They don't know how to set up a tent. But then they're like sitting around like chatting. And one of them is talking about how like he knows they're not going to be famous forever. And like boy bands obviously have this like shelf life. And he just like hopes that someday like a mom will tell her daughter about how like One Direction was just like fun and they didn't know how to dance, but they just had a good time. And I thought that was so beautiful. I mean, that was Louis Tomlinson, someone who said that. I'm not even a Louis fan. I find him kind of annoying generally, but I just thought that was like really, that just like really hit me where it hurts for some reason. And I was like, wow. And then it was kind of like a gradual, like building an interest from there, and just became this like sort of like secret fun thing that I could do at school when I was really unhappy. I could just like be in the back of the lecture hall, like looking at Tumblr and like people like making these jokes or like sharing these GIFs and stuff that I thought was fun and funny too. And like, I don't know, that was when I really became a woman of the internet, I guess. It was a real change for me.
That's what like internet pilled you or whatever. It's like,
Yeah,
now
totally.
I understand. Like now I know what I personally was doing, like in the basement of my family's house when I was 13, like disappearing into the internet all the time.
Yeah, that was also, I got like sucked down the like alt-lit rabbit hole for a little bit. So in hindsight, I'm like, wow, it's really good that I had One Direction. So I didn't invest too hard in that.
This is the positive. One Direction is the positive fandom compared to that. I was always curious, like, is the music like secondary to the narrative and the characters, or was the music important also?
I think it probably depends who you ask. I like, for me, I think the music is just like really fun. Like it sounds like, it's like comforting because it sounds like music your dad would be like playing, just like bopping around the house. It sounds like, like basically that they're like a 70s rock, like pastiche band. I guess that was like, that's the only way I can really describe music, is just like always was fun. And it's never like, I don't think anybody expected it to be like innovative. I feel like even people who would say like that One Direction has produced like iconic pop albums would admit that it's not like they reinvented the wheel.
So it's like you did listen to the music, and then it was like,
yeah.
like it was, the band was important.
Yeah. And then like the more you become a fan of the band and the more you like know about each individual person in the band, the more that like listening to the music becomes fun, because you can kind of get into like, oh, like, how scandalous, they're making Zayn and Harry split this chorus and like try to sound exactly the same. Why are they doing that? Or like, poor Louis, he never gets any good vocal parts. They don't trust him. He can't do it, or like whatever. Like you get into the kind of like jockeying of position of like power rankings of the group, or like analyzing like Harry has a writing credit on this song. Did he really write the line that sounds like a jab at Taylor Swift? Like that part.
So the music becomes like a part of the narrative in a way to like keep the investigation going, kind of.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the music also plays in later to some of the like conspiracy thinking stuff too. Yeah.
I do feel like I'm a big fan of the new Harry Styles album because it sounds like city pop and is very weird.
Yeah,
so I feel like now I'm into it.
I was kind of into it. I feel like I'm like taking a little bit of a break from Harry Styles fandom, because I like this. He's getting a little too self-serious for me. I'm like, it's enough, buddy. But I did like the album ultimately.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering if you could read a little bit from the book. And there's a paragraph that I pointed out to you that I really liked, about the trope of the fangirl. And I'm sure it'd be fun for people to hear you read it.
Yeah, I bookmarked it. Here we go. Okay. Okay. The image of the screaming fangirl is so familiar and dramatic, it precludes curiosity. But for decades, fans have not just passively enjoyed or loudly desired the objects of their fandom. They've also edited them and recirculated them and used them as inspiration for a range of creative works so enormous and largely uncatalogued that it can't even be grasped. The art, the stories, and the in-jokes are as much a part of what it means to be a fan as staking out an airport or memorizing dozens of songs. I would never, ever, ever want to meet a member of One Direction, and I actively evaded the opportunity one afternoon when a co-worker messaged me on Slack to announce that Harry Styles was just sitting around in the coffee shop on the ground floor of our office building. But I would like to spend every day online talking about them. And I've spent years now tinkering with my ideas about what they might signify.
I thought it was so good because it like mingles your own feelings about it. It's like your own ambivalence of being interested in it, but also wanting and needing to keep it at arm's length, to the point that you literally like kind of don't go out of your way to meet Harry Styles.
Yeah, that was a weird day because it was also like the coffee shop inside of like a Eddie Bauer store or something. It was like, why would Harry Styles ever be there? And my coworker was like, oh, he's down there, you gotta go. And then I didn't see the Slack for like 20 minutes and I was like, oh, I'm sure he's gone by now. That's fine, I missed it, no worries. And he was like, no, he's still here. Actually, I think I missed him, I think he's gone.
Oh man. Like following on that paragraph, I wanted to ask about like the trope of the fangirl as it's existed, like from the Beatles with like screaming girls in the crowd on, and how like both like the reaction to your book and like through the work of your book, like how you reframe that trope a little bit.
Yeah. That part was really fun to research because there was just like so many old press clippings like describing things that fangirls would do, and some of them sounded so outlandish to me. I was like, was this fact checked? Like, did people really? There was one that was like talking about girls like snapping their limbs like twigs. It's like this is like a a rash of broken bones at this like whatever like airport greeting for the Beatles. I don't know about that, but anyway, I guess like part of like what I wanted to do with the fangirl trope was like, for one, kind of like think about why a young woman would want to go out in public and like scream in this sort of like blood curdling way that was, and like why people found it so disturbing. And I think there's just kind of like it's not like that fascinating of an answer. It's like pretty clear just misogyny and like you know, like fear of like deviance or of like women like being like behaving in this kind of like ugly inexplicable way. But then secondly, I guess the image of the fangirl I thought was just like so indelible. Like people can really just like evoke it with a couple of words, and everyone has this kind of like knee-jerk like feeling of secondhand embarrassment, like, oh, those girls are like, it's so sad, those girls are so like mindless, like they don't even know why they're screaming, or they're just like overcome by their hormones or whatever. Whereas like actually most of the people I spoke to, I mean all of the people I spoke to for the book would be like, yeah, I went like freaking wild at the One Direction concerts, and then they like go home and like write their super elaborate fan fiction, or like chop up all the footage they made into like GIF sets or like freaky looking memes or whatever. Or they're like like they're usually, if you ask like one question, like almost anybody has like some level of self-awareness. Like everybody thinks about themselves and why they do the things that they do. So so it was like fun, I guess, to like hear some of the like stories behind the screams, as it were.
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, the trope of like the screaming girl outside the Beatles is like no thoughts in her head, like just pure kind of animal reaction or something. Like this woman has lost her mind.
Yeah,
but
like
actually
it is, but that's like fun, I guess. Like I've like screamed at a One Direction concert before, even though like I have a lot of like anxiety about being in a body in public. So I maybe like didn't get to like quite the level of like abandon as some of the other people, but like that's fun. Like I don't see like people having the same reaction to like people screaming at like football games or something, which is like the same thing basically.
Yeah,
Maybe
I was actually talking to someone about this, like sports is fandom as well. Like these are, but it's like if fandoms literally fought each other in the fields and scored points on each other or something.
Yeah. I feel like sports fandom is actually like a completely, there's within the like academic field of fandom, there's like all of the media fandom on one side, and then sports fandom is like totally separate, and it's like it's completely different people, like no crossover, like no mutual interest in each other. Like the sports people are just over there.
That's so funny. Even though it's like kind of similar motivations of like total obsession with one group of people to the point that you know like how many points this guy scored versus that guy, or like what percentage of at bats, which I have no idea what that means, they do. Like that's total fandom. That's total crazy obsession.
Yeah. There's actually too like some writing about how like fandoms dominated by men tend to lean more towards like mimetic fandom. So like just sort of like, yeah, like memorizing things about them and like reciting things about them, or like, you know, like building direct replicas of things, or like dressing exactly like a stormtrooper. Whereas like the fandom that I was talking about in the book is more like transformational fandom, where it's like taking the object of a fandom and like making something different with it. Not to like overgeneralize, but that is like something that's been pointed out in the literature, and the girls are a little bit more creative.
Yeah. And when there's one section, or like I think it recurs, but there's one part of the book that discusses really clearly like I think your mom's relationship with Bruce Springsteen, being a Bruce Springsteen fan, and kind of the recent history of fandom. And as I was reading it, I was just like, wow, I've never thought about what it was like to like hear Bruce Springsteen in the 70s or whatever and be a huge fan and get like swept up in Bruce Springsteen mania. And like I love Bruce Springsteen and I love the music, whatever, but I never thought of it that way before, that like Bruce Springsteen could be the One Direction of his day in a way.
Yeah.
And maybe you could just tell that story a little bit and like talk about how you talked with your mom and kind of lived this Bruce Springsteen fandom yourself, actually.
Yeah. So I talked about Bruce Springsteen in the chapter that was kind of about like how people become fans, because there is an academic named Daniel Sabici who actually wrote like a whole book about Springsteen fans, which is one of my favorite books, actually. It's truly amazing. And people have a really hard time describing how they became a fan of something. They were like sort of inching towards like religious metaphors, like religious epiphanies, and then like kind of like stepping back and being like embarrassed about having used that language, and like basically, yeah, like ultimately just describing it as kind of like going from this state of being like kind of dismal or bored to going to this state of like enlightenment through this like person that was the object of their fandom. So I included like some conversations with my mom just because I was curious about her experience becoming a Springsteen fan, but also because like in some of the other reporting, I had been talking to like moms who were One Direction fans because of their daughters, and I was really interested in sort of like cross-generational fandom and thinking about how like not only does your relationship with an artist sort of like define the different stages of your own life and sort of help you think through your own personal narrative, but like maybe if it's something you share with somebody else, it can help you like develop a different kind of relationship with them, or a different type of understanding of their lives that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So in my case, I was like, I describe in the book, like going through this sort of difficult time where I had like my first really seismic breakup that made me act super weird for like an entire year. And I was just really miserable and like kind of struggling to articulate it to my mom, because I felt like she hadn't had that same experience, being that she had like, you know, been with my dad since high school. I was like, this is the first thing that's happened in my life that I feel like you can't understand. And that in itself is very painful to me. And then like, I just had this like weird night in Manhattan and was like going back over the bridge and heard like a Bruce Springsteen song that I knew like was really important to my mom when she was a teenager, and like just had this like kind of weird moment of it just like clicking into place, like, oh, like even if my mom didn't experience this, like she experienced the same kind of feelings of like being like scared or lonely or like confused about her place in the world. And like this like song is sort of this like medium, I guess, between our two different experiences. So yeah, that's probably the most personal chapter in the book, and the one that has gotten some negative attention on Goodreads for being uncomfortable. But
oh no, why is it uncomfortable? I mean, don't read Goodreads, but
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Probably because it talks about an abortion, but
okay, well, that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
And so did that experience like make you into more of a Springsteen fan, where suddenly you're like, oh, I have a different relationship to this music, or I realized that I had this connection to it all along?
Yeah, I guess it was more like realizing it, because I definitely in high school, because I thought my mom was just like the coolest person in the world and like had the best taste and everything. Like I wanted to be a Springsteen fan too. So I already had listened to all the music and like was pretty familiar with it. And like there's several songs that I had like painstakingly memorized the lyrics to. That's something that I did in high school, actually. Like when I was bored in class, I just like write out the lyrics to Bruce Springsteen songs on the back of my homework. And so it was, yeah, I think it was more just like realizing as an adult, like this is part of why the music is so interesting to me, because I feel like it gives me this insight into who my mom is other than my mom.
Totally. And just to note for the audience, we're going to do Q&A pretty soon, and you can put Q&As in the Q&A box on Zoom. But I still have more questions. So I know it's kind of, there's an ambivalent portrait of fandom in the book and of like the One Direction fandom. And I feel like the whole, I literally could not explain it myself, but the whole Larry's thing kind of gets at that. So I was wondering if you could define for everyone like what Larry's are, and like how this force of fandom can also turn kind of like bizarre and negative.
Yeah, there was originally, I think, like 14,000 words or something about Larry's in the first draft of this book because it's so complicated. But so I guess in the most basic form, like Larry Stylinson is the like ship name for Louis Tomlinson and Harry Styles, two members of the band. It's complex because there are some people who write fan fiction about them as a pairing who are just doing it as like a creative exercise and don't actually believe that they're secretly in love. But then there's this other pretty like infamous faction of the fandom that believes like they are secretly married and they've been forcefully like closeted by their managers or like other unseen forces in the entertainment industry for the last 10 years. And then that was sort of when that started bubbling up as a conspiracy theory. It got a little bit dicey because like people who were refuting it were sometimes doing so with this kind of like homophobic inflection, and then people who were defending it were often like making fun of people that Harry Styles or Louis Tomlinson were dating, the women they were dating, as like industry plants and like, like gold digger, all these like kind of misogynistic tropes. So it got like pretty political pretty fast. And then when Louis Tomlinson's ex-girlfriend, Brianna Jungwirth, got pregnant with his child, that's like when it took a really dark turn into what is called Babygate. And yeah, so at first some fans thought that the baby was a doll, and then later they decided that it was, obviously it was not a doll, so it was like a paid actor or like Brianna Jungwirth's stepfather's child or something like that. And there are people who still believe that now. Actually, there's like some chatter on Tumblr about how Babygate would come to an end with the release of my book, because like that would be like poetic justice for me if everything that I wrote about Babygate turned out to be wrong, like right the day my book came out. So that's
so it's like reality, like the reality in front of people clashes with like the fandom facts in their head, and it's like, it is like a conspiracy theory or like a constant chase to like justify the latest actual thing that's happened and square it with like the theory.
Yeah. And I think like if like yeah, like when we were talking about earlier, like fandom being sort of like super like hyper focused attention, like that can kind of lend itself to conspiracy thinking because there's so much material out there about One Direction, like thousands of hours of video you can watch, or like all of their social media interactions, and there's like so much to sort of like dig through and mine for like hidden significance. And like there's also sort of like dynamics within the fandom that incentivizes you to be the one to notice something no one else has noticed. So that's just kind of been like going on and on for the last 10 years.
Is that like a clout thing? Like you're kind of seeking authority within your own scene of the fandom and like trying to prove that you're the biggest fan, basically?
Yeah, totally. Or like that was something I think I didn't know about Babygate when it was like first being written about, was that like on Tumblr, there's sort of like influential bloggers within that community. And I think many of them are older women, like women in their 40s and 50s, who are sort of like, yeah, becoming like influencers and like sort of darkly at times, like steering like 14-year-olds into like dedicating all this time to like investigating this horrible crime that they think's being committed.
That's weird to think about also. Like the hierarchy of fandom and the way that there's like more authoritative people influencing like new converts or something.
Yeah, there's also like now kind of this weird divide between like Tumblr Babygate people and like a younger generation of Babygate people who are on like TikTok and Reddit, who like weren't involved at the beginning and just learned about it now and like got interested in it for whatever reason. I haven't like pursued that very far journalistically, but that's so strange to me.
Yeah, like the different platforms generate different theories or communities around these ideas.
Yeah, and there's sort of a feeling of like the Tumblr people are the serious people. Like we've been here, we've been looking into it quite a long time, kid. Or whatever.
Oh my God. Well, on that note, also like what, like you're a reporter, like I'm a reporter. We do a lot of reporting where you go out and talk to people and like find out things and use their quotes and stuff. And I was wondering, even though the book moves between like criticism and memoir and reporting, like how did you approach actually reporting this out and you know, kind of investigating your own fandom?
Yeah. Like right when I started researching the book, I put out like just kind of an open like Google Forums call for fans who wanted to talk about their experiences, and got probably like 300 or so responses to that. So I did a lot of interviews, like phone and email, kind of like depending on what people were comfortable with. And that gave me like a pretty good like broad view, I think, to start from. And then there were like people I already knew of within the fandom who I felt like I really had to talk to. Like I tried to talk to some of the people who were really key in Babygate. Only one of them ended up speaking to me. The other one is probably plotting to sue me, but anyway. And then like some people who had really interesting Tumblrs that I've been following for a really long time, or like I talk about in the book kind of my saga to find this woman who had been like scattering tiny photos of like a photoshopped like pregnant Harry Styles around like the state of Utah for several years. It was really exciting the day that she finally got back to me, because it was like peak early lockdown pandemic, and I was like, I have absolutely no stimuli, like there's nothing to keep me going, and I found the woman who scattered the pictures of pregnant Harry Styles across the state of Utah. This is amazing.
And what did she say to you? Like what was her explanation for this strange phenomenon?
She thought it was so weird that I even was interested. She was just like, I just think it's funny. It's just like something that I've been doing. Like I just want people to like like I like to put them into like library books that look like they haven't been opened in a long time, so that maybe somebody will like find it in 50 years and be so confused. I think she just like thought it was like kind of a prank that she was just playing on, I guess, like the entire population of Utah. And and like she really did not like indulge a lot of my questions about like the significance of that particular photo or of like her relationship to Harry Styles. She was just like, it's funny.
Like you don't need any more
like,
justification than that. Like
I know that's
a
like
weird
that's
thing to do.
with like explaining memes too, or with like asking people about some of the stuff. It's like it's self-evidently funny. Like there's nothing else to say.
Right. I mean, sometimes with internet stuff, you do feel like the square or something as a reporter, you're like, I'm here to like explain the joke or to like kind of wreck it, like by exposing it to more people. And
like tie the joke into some like overarching like theme about how we live now.
It's always the problem. We're always living in a certain way and it has to be explained. Well, there are some questions, so maybe it's a good time to start since there are a few.
Okay.
So I like this one to start with. What musical artists are you into now?
I don't know. I guess like I'm like a huge Taylor Swift head. I feel like that's actually that's like my truer fandom than One Direction. It's not one that I would write about because I don't want to be like assassinated.
That feels like a natural progression though, or maybe they just exist in the same mode. Like well, that as a fandom.
Like Taylor Swift's first album came out when I was like 13 in rural America, so that's more like that's my DNA.
That's the deeper connection. Taylor Swift is the real Bruce Springsteen of our time.
Okay, honestly, of our generation,
could be highly literary lyrics, some kind of forest LARPing.
I don't know about the class.
Pretty cool.
But
okay, let's do another question. Let's see. This one, what's your best advice for hardcore fans who struggle to condemn their heroes when misconduct is uncovered? How can fans both call out poor behavior while calling in the artists from a place of love? So I guess kind of like expressing your dissatisfaction with the target of your fandom while like still remaining a fan.
Yeah. I feel like there is sort of a weird dynamic like between fandoms where whenever like a famous person is called out for like saying something stupid or like doing something really bad, people in other fandoms kind of gloat over it a little bit, like, oh, you're like your fave turned out to be problematic, whereas like mine is perfect. I guess like I'm probably a little bit guilty of that myself even. I'm sort of like, I'm a Niall Horan fan. I like placed my bet correctly. Like I don't imagine him doing anything that would upset me. And then he turned out to be like best friends with like he has a very close friend who's like a mega guy. And I was like, oh God, Niall. I don't know. I mean, I feel like you can probably try to think about it the way that you think about someone you know in real life. Like, I don't know, accountability should apply to everybody, including celebrities. At the same time, like you can't like invest too much of your self-worth or self-image in like somebody else's behavior. I guess it's just like trying to be like rigorous with reality and not like in One Direction fandom, there was like an incident that was kind of part of Babygate where Louis Tomlinson like said a racial slur on camera, and some of the Babygate like participants were like convincing themselves like, oh, he didn't want to say that, like management forced him to say that as part of his kind of like new bad boy persona that they're forcing him to put on to like convince everybody that he's straight. And it's like, I think for the most part, like if you're like willing to think critically at all, like you should recognize that that's like not a healthy way to approach information.
Yeah. Though I guess there's also like fandoms now have the force and like almost capability to call out their their subjects, and like then it becomes like a news story, basically. Like fans are rebelling against so and so because of something that happened, and it becomes like a way for not keeping them in check, but just like expressing displeasure very publicly.
Yeah, definitely. Like when Nicki Minaj was doing her like whole like vaccine hesitancy routine, there was like a whole mix of reactions from that fandom, from people kind of like contorting to make it like, oh, what she said is actually reasonable. She never said the vaccine's bad. She said like, do your own research or whatever. And then other fans who were like she retweeted a clip of Tucker Carlson like complimenting her or whatever. And so some of her fans were like, Nikki, that's a white supremacist. Like, please do not retweet him or whatever. So I think like, yeah, like everybody has to have their own line, I guess.
Yeah, here is another question. Fandom and standom as an idea provokes such a negative reaction in pop culture and people who write about it. Do you think that fandom in general gets as bad a rep as people believe it is? Or do you think that you can separate stans from fandoms? I guess, so it's like, stan to me is like more intense even than fandom, right? It's like more of an allegiance. So like, yeah, do you separate between those two things, or is fandom just by nature this kind of like corrupting force?
Yeah, I think like, yeah, the word stan is probably more associated with like the really kind of like almost like strident like Twitter version of fandom that's very much about like policing conversation, or like you know, a lot of people have probably like seen it when it's been about when stans have like shouted down a journalist and like doxed them and threatened their children and stuff. Like that I think is a pretty like, that's obviously a substantial part of internet fandom. I don't think it's necessarily like core to what being a fan is in general. Like I think in the book I was trying to get at the idea that like fandom has a lot of different expressions, and some of them are actually like really kind of like private and personal, and don't necessarily involve like, I was never a poster. I never posted anything the whole time I was on Tumblr, like totally immersed in this world. I was never posting. I was only ever like lurking or like reblogging other people's stuff. So I think there's like all kinds of versions of fandom, and they don't necessarily have to involve that. I think that's something that just kind of came about because it's sort of a like, I don't know, accident of timing with like fans finding Twitter and Twitter being set up for that sort of behavior. And like, yeah.
Right, like Twitter fandom has a different ring to it. Like I just think of like, I don't know, Glenn Greenwald army, or like Matt Iglesias or something, like people who kind of marshal people to argue for them, or people to insult other people, more so. Like no one's posting gift sets of Glenn Greenwald, I don't think. Like there's no kind of aesthetic worship. It's more just purely like I agree with this person's beliefs or something.
Yeah, like ideological warfare. Yeah, I've definitely been on the wrong side of the Glenn Greenwald fandom before. It's not the best day I've ever had on the internet.
Well, this kind of follows. What's the creepiest thing you've seen a fan do?
Oh, creepiest thing. I don't know. I don't like to say anybody's creepy.
I mean, there is the anecdote you have in the book of people kind of turning a place on the highway that Harry Styles might have thrown up into like a shrine.
Yeah,
that was pretty creepy to me. I don't know.
well, I guess like sort of, but like part of why I included that was because that girl was like really surprised to have received so much media attention for something that she thought was just like kind of a funny thing to do to entertain herself. Like she probably imagined like, oh, I'll put up this sign, like, and I'll take a picture of it and put it on my Tumblr, and like 10 of my fandom friends will think it's funny. And then all of a sudden it was like on every like tabloid website, like praised fan, like obsessed with vomit or whatever. When I talked to her, she was like, I didn't even see any vomit. Like I just like went there because I recognized like she lived like right in that neighborhood. So she recognized whatever piece of like metal barrier was in the photo of Harry Styles throwing up. But yeah, I guess like if she had actually scooped up the vomit, that would be creepy. I would feel comfortable calling that creepy.
So it's kind of like taken more seriously than it was meant.
Yeah, which is I feel like sort of a like ongoing like thread in the book. Like a lot of these things that like seem really like ridiculous from the outside are like kind of meant as jokes.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Here's one. Can you talk more about the similarities and differences between different fandoms? It seems like there's a shared behavior of feeling unafraid to show genuine awe and respect for something, but groups can be so different.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't spent a ton of time in other fandoms, so I don't know if I could like compare and contrast like a One Direction fandom with another one. I think like maybe like pop music fandom has had a little bit more of like a redemption arc where it's not like seen as weird, where there are other fandoms where that still carry a lot more stigma and therefore are like a little bit more private or like a little bit more like still kind of have that like embarrassment factor to participate in them. Like I don't know, like people will still roast like Disney adults like all day long on the and or whatever.
Is that Disney fandom? It's like Disney World fandom, I guess.
Yeah.
Literally of the theme park.
Yeah. Or like I guess like Ryan Broderick, who writes the Garbage Day Substack, did something really good recently about how Star Wars fandom seems to have this kind of like reactionary contingent they just like can't get rid of. Like they just have, there's just this pattern that whenever there's like a person of color or like a woman prominently featured in a Star Wars movie, they are like suffer extreme harassment and backlash. And there'll always sort of be this like half of the Star Wars fandom that says like, that's not what this series is about. Like this series is supposed to be like progressive and pro-democracy, like anti slow slide into fascism or whatever. And then there's just this like, yeah, this other like massive, like sort of like insidious toxic element that's kind of been festering ever since Gamergate that they can't dispense of. So I guess that's sort of similar to One Direction in the sense that like the Babygate conspiracy theory really just like split that fandom in half. I feel like that's sort of a sad recurring narrative in a lot of fandoms, is that there'll be this like schism that just like is never recovered from at a certain point.
Yeah, those Star Wars, like each fandom is different based on the subject, I guess. And Star Wars did start with space war, like spiritual warriors for space battles.
Yeah.
Big weapons. And there's like, that's not quite, I don't know, it might exist on a more violent level than pop music.
Yeah, it's true. And it's also like, I think like I don't know, the stigma around certain fandoms is also hard to talk about because like at some point I kind of like, I think the language of like, let people like whatever they like you shouldn't judge anybody for what they enjoy is like true on one level, but on another level, it's like, okay, but like some things are bad, like some things are bad, like politically, like artistically, spiritually, like you should still be able to like criticize like cultural phenomenon without it being like you've like somehow like undercut my identity or my like existence as a person by criticizing this thing that I really like.
That is funny because like, I mean, criticism is always said to be dying, and like professional criticism is in a very weird place right now. But, like the job of the critic and the job of the fan are sometimes similar, where it's to like dive into the minutia of a thing and try to like understand it at a deep level, you know, beyond the normal engagement with it.
Yeah, totally.
I like this question also. Do you think markets are too manipulative of fans, getting them to spend a lot of money by playing into their obsession? There's certainly like so much effort to capitalize on fandom. Like I feel like Star Wars, how is there another Star Wars TV show like every 2 months? I literally don't understand.
Yeah, I feel like this was like one of the harder things to write about because I both want to kind of like defend accusations of that like fans are like more susceptible to like marketing or to capitalism than other people, because I think like everyone is susceptible to that. And it's in some ways like fans are sort of like put in a position to think about it more, because you are kind of like presented with these like really obvious manipulations. Like if I'm like, as a fan, I get like very irritated when the like Ticketmaster official accounts are like tweeting in stan language and like sending me emails being like, oh, I know tomorrow's sale is going to be really hard and some people are going to be heartbroken. It's like, you don't care if I'm heartbroken if I can't get a Harry Styles ticket. So there's like kind of this like active resentment, I think, of the entertainment industry and of the like marketing machine, and fans like actively resist that in some ways. Like when there was like the WikiLeaks document dump from Sony, and there was a PowerPoint sort of talking about how each member of One Direction was going to be marketed, fans were like livid about that. Like, you know, these people are fools that they think that they could ever like understand what exactly it is that we love about Liam Payne or Harry Styles. Like, how dare they even try, basically. And then similarly, like in their sort of like incessant use of social media, especially Twitter, I think like fans are pretty aware of the like kind of like diabolical position they like put the platform in, where it's like fans are the most enthusiastic users of Twitter and they're on Twitter all the time, and Twitter's bottom line is like would certainly be affected by the exodus of fandom, but fans are also like abusing the platform in a lot of ways and like breaking the rules and like appropriating the features for their own ends and like breaking copyright law and all that stuff. So I think it's like, yeah, like not to say that they're like anti-capitalist or like revolutionaries, but I do think that like fandom presents like an opportunity to think a little bit more about how you're being manipulated by market forces.
Totally. That's funny that they like took offense to the marketing like script that was going to be applied to these people.
Yeah. Some of
like, how dare you market to us?
Yeah, I mean, some of it was kind of offensive. Like one of the key phrases on like the Harry Styles slide was like adorably slow, or like but like the marketing vein is like the mysterious one, which is like obviously kind of like racially tinged. Like I think some of their beefs with One Direction's like management were justified at times.
Totally. And seems like a good last question. What's your take on fans who find friends within a given community, basing their relationship purely on a shared aesthetic or interest? I mean, I'm just curious to hear about like people do make friends within fandoms, and it's like both a way for people to connect with the thing, but also with each other, it seems like.
Yeah, I think like people find really meaningful friendships in fandom. I mean, also like organizing a community around like the single shared affinity of like, I love Harry Styles, and not necessarily any other shared values or experiences, is part of the reason that fandom can be so volatile and why there's so much sort of like infighting about the meaning of any given fandom. But yeah, it's fun to make friends based on your interests. It seems normal.
Cool. Should we wrap things up probably?
Yeah. So hi, I'm back. Thank you for this like super fun talk. As somebody who did grow up with like, I think I've said this to you on Twitter, but like I can track like stages of my life through like the different fandoms I was part of. And yeah, no, I have some friends who I've been friends with for decades that I've met on like Tumblr or LiveJournal, and like it's been fun. But I want to ask both of you the last question for the evening. Since we are a bookstore, we'd like to know what y'all are reading or what you'd like to suggest to our audience tonight.
You go first.
Okay. I've been recommending this book to everyone. Where's the like, is there a chat thing? I'm gonna put it in the chat because it's like so good. It's this book called The Europeans, and it's about 3 19th century artists, like a woman singer who's married to a composer / journalist / whatever, and then Ivan Turgenev, the novelist. And it's literally just about their like weird menage a trois throughout the 19th century and like how they made money and how they took trains and how they built houses and like, you know, what they did with their children. And it's just like feels the most realistic depiction of a historical period that I could possibly imagine. And just like the three characters are so rich and fascinating. Like it truly feels like a rounded portrait of their very weird lives. It's just like so fun to read. I'm having a great time reading it.
That sounds great. That's also a great title. Let's see. I'm like a real New York City head lately. I've just been like reading New York history. So right now I'm reading a collection of Pete Hamill's essays, but like columnist for the New York Post in the 60s. And it's very much just like, it's such a different like era of newspaper column because it's like, here's 800 words about how I went home from leave from the Korean War and like went to the bar in Park Slope that my dad hangs out in. And that's how I knew I was a man now, because I was allowed in that bar, whatever. But it's really fun. It's like, I think it's like a great way to learn about like a specific historical period in a city you care about, is just like read newspaper column collections. And some of the prose is like not great, but he even says at the beginning, like in hindsight, a lot of these sound really like sappy and bad. But but it's super interesting. And I love New York. I always want to learn about what people were doing in Brooklyn at times before I lived here.
Well, thank you. Thank you both so much for sharing. Thank you for sharing your time and your energy tonight. And thank you to the audience for coming out and spending an evening with us. Your patronage is what enables us to bring you programming like this, and we cannot continue to host these types of events without the book sales to support them. So please support Caitlyn Tiffany and Politics and Prose by using the link in the chat to purchase her amazing new book, Everything I Need, I Get From You. And check out, I love holding it up. Check out our website for the most current updated event listings, as we have a great list to choose from that are both virtual and in person. And we do hope to see you all at our stores and or on the internet. And thank you once again for joining us tonight. Thank you, Kaitlyn and Kyle. We definitely stand. Finger heart. So thank you, everyone. So to everyone else here tonight, stay safe, stay warm, and